Note for video. My videos are fact-based, made for curious minds and knowledge lovers. If you spot any mistakes, please comment. It helps me improve and keeps the facts accurate. Some may love cinematic visuals, but my focus is purely educational and informative. Let's dive into the video. What if I told you that for a huge chunk of history, the smartest people on Earth thought drilling a hole in your skull was a legitimate cure for a headache? Or that your entire personality was dictated by 4 different colors of goo sloshing around inside you? Yeah, science has given us space travel and answers to any question we can type into a phone. But the road to get here, it was weird. It's a road paved with bizarre theories, dangerous assumptions, and ideas so strange it's hard to believe they were ever considered undeniable truth. And these weren't just fringe ideas from the crackpots, this was the mainstream consensus. This was what the experts believed and practiced for centuries. So today, we're counting down 7 scientific facts that are now known to be completely and utterly insane. Trepanation, a hole in the head. Kicking things off at number 7 is something that sounds less like medicine and more like a horror movie, drilling a hole in someone's head to cure them. This is trepanation, and it's one of the oldest surgical procedures known to humanity. We're talking Stone Age old. Archaeologists have found skulls from 7,000 years ago with deliberate, circular holes scraped or drilled into them. Now, you might be thinking this was just some bizarre ritual, and sometimes it probably was. But for millennia, it was also considered a cutting-edge medical treatment. Got a skull fracture? Drill a hole to relieve the pressure. Suffering from migraines, seizures, or what they saw as evil spirits? Just pop a hole in there and let him out. One 13th century surgical text literally recommended it for epileptics so that the humors and air may go out and evaporate. The tools were as terrifying as you're picturing: sharpened flint, obsidian, and eventually a hand-cranked Greek drill called a trephine, all used without anesthesia. The truly mind-blowing part: people actually survived this. We have numerous skulls that show clear signs of healing, meaning the patient lived for months or even years. Survival rates in ancient Peru were shockingly high, with some studies showing they improved from around 40% in 400 BC to as high as 91% between 1000 and 1400 AD. Ironically, when the procedure moved into 19th century European hospitals, survival rates were often much worse because of rampant infections. Today, a highly refined and sterile version called a craniotomy is still used to access the brain, but it's no longer seen as a cure in itself. It just goes to show that humanity's first instinct when faced with a problem was sometimes to just drill a hole in it. The 4 humors. Next up at number 6 is a theory that dominated all of Western medicine for over 2,000 years. Forget germs or genetics. For the longest time, your health and your personality were thought to be governed by 4 liquids, or humors, circulating in your body. Systemized by Greek physicians like Hippocrates and championed by the Roman physician Galen, the 4 humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each was linked to an element and a season. A healthy person had these 4 fluids in perfect balance. But if you had too much of one, that's where the trouble started. Too much blood made you sanguine, cheerful and energetic. Too much phlegm made you phlegmatic, calm and unemotional. An excess of yellow bile made you choleric, angry and bad-tempered. And an overabundance of the mysterious, and probably imaginary, black bile made you melancholic, sad and depressive. This wasn't some quirky personality test, it was the foundation of all medical diagnosis. Got a fever? Probably too much blood. The cure? Bloodletting. Doctors would open a vein and drain the excess into a bowl for almost any ailment. Other cures involved purging excess humors through vomiting or diarrhea. It took the development of microbiology in the 19th century to finally prove that diseases were caused by germs, not unbalanced goo. It's a sobering thought that for 2 millennia, the answer to, "What's wrong with me, Doc?" was basically, your juices are off balance. By the way, if your mind is already blown by head drilling and magic goo, do us a favor and tap that like button. It helps us know you enjoy these dives into bizarre history. Alright, let's get back to it. Spontaneous generation. Our number 5 spot goes to a belief that seems absurd today but was accepted as simple, observable fact for thousands of years: spontaneous generation. This is the idea that life can just appear out of non-living matter. It wasn't even controversial. The great philosopher Aristotle wrote about it as a fact of nature. Maggots arose from decaying meat, and mice from dirty hay. It just made sense. You leave garbage in a corner, and you come back later to find rats. Where else did they come from? For 2 millennia, this was the scientific consensus. A 17th century recipe for creating mice literally instructed you to place a sweaty undershirt and some wheat in a jar and wait 21 days. The first major blow against this came in 1668 from an Italian physician named Francesco Redi. He guessed that maggots hatched from eggs laid by flies. He set up an experiment with jars of meat, some open, some sealed, and some covered with gauze. Sure enough, maggots only appeared in the open jars where flies could land. But the microscope created a new problem. Tiny animalcules, what we now call bacteria, swarmed in pond water. Surely these arose spontaneously. It wasn't until 1859 that Louis Pasteur finally put the theory to rest for good with his special swan neck flask. He boiled broth in it, killing any microbes. The S-shaped neck let air in but trapped airborne dust and germs in the bend. The broth stayed sterile. But as soon as he tipped the flask to let the broth touch the trapped dust, it swarmed with life. He proved that life only comes from pre-existing life, and just like that, the field of microbiology was born. The miasma theory at number 4 is a theory that literally stinks. For centuries, if you got sick, the primary suspect was bad air. This was the miasma theory, the belief that diseases like cholera and the Black Death were caused by miasma, a poisonous, foul-smelling vapor. The word malaria even comes from the Italian for bad air, malaria, because the disease was common around smelly swamps. It seemed logical. In filthy cities where sewage ran in the streets, disease was rampant. These places smelled awful, so the smell itself must be the disease. This belief persisted all the way into the late 19th century. Your best defense? Avoid the stench. People carried flowers or held perfumed handkerchiefs to their noses. Plague doctors wore those famous beak masks stuffed with aromatic herbs to filter the deadly air, not to block germs, but to overpower the bad smells. Ironically, acting on this incorrect theory sometimes led to the right outcomes. The belief spurred major public health movements, with cities building sanitation systems and improving ventilation to eliminate foul odors. Florence Nightingale was a staunch believer and insisted on cleanliness in hospitals, which dramatically reduced death rates. The theory was finally overthrown during a devastating cholera outbreak in London in 1854. A physician named John Snow was skeptical. He meticulously mapped the cases and noticed they were all clustered around a single public water pump on Broad Street. He convinced the local council to remove the pump's handle, and the cholera cases in that area stopped almost immediately. Snow had proven the disease was spreading through contaminated water, not a stinky fog, paving the way for the germ theory of disease. Phrenology. Taking the number 3 spot is phrenology, the pseudoscience of reading a person's character and intelligence by feeling the bumps on their head. Developed by German physician Franz Joseph Gall in 1796, it was wildly influential for decades. Gall's theory was based on a few ideas that sound almost plausible. 1. The brain is the organ of the mind. 2. The mind has different faculties, like benevolence or combativeness. 3. Each faculty has its own spot in the brain. Here's where it went completely off the rails. Gall argued that the size of a brain organ was a measure of its power. A bigger organ would create a corresponding bump on your skull. Therefore, by measuring the bumps, a phrenologist could create a scientific personality profile. For a time in the early 19th century, phrenology was all the rage. People went to phrenologists for career advice or to assess potential marriage partners. Elaborate porcelain heads mapped out the different faculties. But beyond being a quirky parlor game, phrenology had a dark side. It was quickly co-opted to justify scientific racism and eugenics. Phrenologists claimed the skulls of white Europeans proved their superior intelligence and character, while the skulls of other races supposedly proved their inferiority, providing a pseudo-scientific basis for prejudice. By the mid-1800s, the scientific community began to tear phrenology apart. Experiments showed that the supposed organs didn't align with actual brain functions. Though the core idea that different brain regions have different functions, known as localization of function, is true, the belief that you could read them by feeling skull bumps was exposed as complete nonsense. Maternal impression coming in at number 2 is a belief that put an incredible amount of pressure on expecting mothers, maternal impression. This was the long-held theory that a pregnant woman's thoughts, emotions, and experiences could directly imprint themselves onto her developing fetus, causing birth defects. For centuries, this wasn't just folklore, it was a medical explanation. Did a child have a strawberry-shaped birthmark? The mother must have craved strawberries during her pregnancy. Was a baby born with a cleft lip? Perhaps the mother was startled by a rabbit. The logic was simple and terrifying. Whatever a pregnant woman saw or strongly imagined could physically manifest in her child. The famous case of Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, was often explained this way. The story went that his mother was frightened by an elephant while pregnant. This belief led to all sorts of advice. Pregnant women were told to surround themselves with beautiful objects and to avoid any shocking sights. They were warned not to look at people with disabilities for fear it would mark their own child. This theory placed an immense burden of blame on mothers for any perceived imperfection in their children. The rise of modern genetics and embryology eventually debunked it, proving that birth defects are caused by genetic or environmental factors, not a mother's fleeting thoughts. The expanding Earth, and finally, at our number 1 spot, a theory that proves even the 20th century wasn't safe from wild scientific ideas, the expanding Earth theory. While most ideas on our list are ancient, this one had serious proponents well into the 1960s. The idea arose from an old puzzle. Since the first world maps, people noticed that the coastlines of South America and Africa looked like they could fit together. In the early 20th century, some scientists proposed a radical solution. What if the continents were being pushed apart because the Earth itself was growing? Proponents suggested our planet was once much smaller and covered by a single supercontinent. Then, the planet began to expand, cracking the landmass and pushing the continents apart as new ocean floor formed in the gaps. This wasn't just a fringe idea. It was championed by influential geologists like Samuel Warren Carey, and even figures like Charles Darwin and Nikola Tesla briefly flirted with versions of the concept. It provided a compelling, if bizarre, explanation for the shape of the continents. However, the theory had a massive flaw. There was no plausible mechanism that could cause the Earth to expand so dramatically. Plus, modern measurements show the Earth is not getting bigger. The real answer, plate tectonics, was being developed at the same time. The discovery of seafloor spreading showed that new crust is indeed created at mid-ocean ridges, but, and this is the key part, old crust is simultaneously destroyed at subduction zones. The Earth's size remains constant because it recycles its crust. Plate tectonics could explain all the same evidence, but without violating the laws of physics. From holes in our heads to an ever-inflating planet, the history of science is a wild ride. It's easy to look back and laugh, but it's important to remember these ideas weren't born from stupidity. They were honest attempts by the smartest people of their time to explain the world with the evidence they had. They were the stepping stones and the wrong turns that eventually led us to where we are today. Science isn't a static book of facts. It's a dynamic, often messy, process of questioning, testing, and correcting itself. Every theory, no matter how solid it seems, is open to being challenged. And that makes you wonder, what facts that we take for granted today will end up on a list like this 100 years from now? Let me know your predictions in the comments below. What modern scientific belief do you think future generations will find completely insane? If you enjoyed this journey into the weird side of science, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.